A drone shot of an ice wall collapsing into a glacial lake. Let me set the scene a little more dramatically. In the background, the sun is rising over the European Alps. As a climber makes his way along this precarious ice ridge, every minute, 13 million liters of glacier water melts. The ice wall collapses and falls into the turquoise waters below. This is what it sounds like. And in just the last decade, this glacier has retreated by 200 meters, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that's about the length of 2.5 American football fields. These melting giants are disappearing at a rate of 10 times faster than they were a century ago. And that's no exaggeration. The volume of ice lost in the last 3 decades alone was 4 times greater than it had been in the previous decades since records began. But where exactly are all of these glaciers located, and why should you care if they're so far away? There are over 100,000 glaciers across Earth's surface, but 99% of them are found in just 2 places. They're either clinging on for dear life at the top of mountains in the Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes, or Alaska, or they're floating off the coast of Greenland and Antarctica. Together, these frozen reservoirs hold around 75% of Earth's fresh water, and about 3/4 of that is stored in just one place, Antarctica. It's actually pretty easy to see how glaciers form. If it snows in winter and the snow isn't blown away by winds or washed away by rains, then it stays there year after year. As more snow falls on top of it, the pressure squeezes the air out of the lower layers, turning it into dense, shiny ice. And when enough snow and ice have piled up, gravity takes over and pulls it all downhill, creating these massive rivers of ice that carve through valleys and sometimes even level whole mountains. But right now, as we speak, time lapses are being played out across mountain ranges worldwide as glaciers retreat from their winter homes. Here's one such lapse taken over the span of 24 years. In 1995, this glacier covered about 2,500 acres. By 2018, it had shrunk by nearly half. All around the world, scientists are tracking how glaciers are receding by watching time lapses like this. And while each glacier is different, most of them are changing rapidly. This map shows the equilibrium line altitude for several glaciers around the world. That is the elevation at which glaciers should be advancing if temperatures are average, but almost all of the glaciers on this map are far below that line. For example, this Alaskan glacier is receding twice as fast as it should be based on average temperatures. And here's another Alaskan glacier that has completely disappeared in the last couple of decades. And this shrinking isn't just happening up in the mountains. The massive Thwaites Glacier in West Antarctica, nicknamed the River of Doom, is currently retreating at a rate of 2 miles per year. And researchers have discovered deep networks of subglacial rivers flowing beneath the ice sheet. As the ice thins and recedes, it's exposing land that hasn't seen daylight in thousands of years. Okay, but all of this ice has to go somewhere when it melts. So where does it go? Well, it might end up in your glass of water sooner or later. A recent study published in Nature found that most of the meltwater from the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush ranges flows directly into local waterways, replenishing river systems that provide water to over 2 billion people. In other words, glaciers serve as freshwater banks that keep releasing fresh water into the supply line. When those banks collapse, communities living downstream will likely face water shortages in the near future. That includes the entire Ganges River basin, home to over 500 million people. Some experts predict that by 2035, water availability in the region could drop by as much as 60%. On top of that, the economic impacts of glacier loss will affect hundreds of millions. More people who depend on industries like agriculture and hydropower that rely on steady water levels. On the other hand, elsewhere in the world, melting glaciers are contributing to sea level rise. In fact, melting glaciers account for roughly 1/4 of the global sea level rise we've seen in the last few decades, and that's causing coastal flooding, erosion, and saltwater intrusion into freshwater aquifers. So far, we've focused on the effects that climate change is having on glaciers and what happens to the water once it melts. But what about the glaciers themselves? What actually happens to them? Well, take a look at this aerial view of the Gangkhar Plensum Glacier in Bhutan. In this photo, you can see that the glacier is left behind a rocky desert called a glacier. The word till refers to the sediment deposits that get scraped up by the moving ice and left behind when it stops. As glaciers recede, they deposit their rocky till on the land below, transforming entire landscapes in the process. And if the sediments reach the ocean, they contribute to the formation of new land. For example, at the mouth of every glacier in Alaska, you'll find a small beach made of rock and dirt that the glacier picked up during its slow trek down the mountain. Over time, these beaches pile up and grow, and under the right conditions can become new land. So you can think of glaciers as sculptors, constantly carving out the landscape and leaving behind giant pieces of rock. Or you can think of them as farmers that deposit nutrient-rich soil wherever they travel. But right now, both of these roles are being taken away from us because the glaciers are disappearing before our eyes. And it's not just some abstract statistic. These giants are full of stories. Take the Elestia in Switzerland, for example. Over the last 200 years, it's shrunk from covering an area larger than Manhattan to covering an area smaller than Central Park. In fact, this glacier is the longest in the Alps, at nearly 12 miles long. Back in the day, you could cross from one side to the other in just a couple of hours. But nowadays, it would take you almost an entire day to make that journey. To make matters worse, the remaining parts of the glacier are becoming increasingly unstable, making hiking across it downright dangerous. Or take the Saturnal Glacier in Italy. Every summer, thousands of tourists visit this spot because that's where Romeo and Juliet first met in Shakespeare's play. Now, unfortunately, the glacier is in such poor condition that visitors need to wear special goggles and helmets to protect themselves from falling ice. You don't even have to hear from scientists to understand what's happening. Take the case of Mount Kenya in Africa. The mountain's name comes from the Kikuyu people who live nearby, and believe that their ancestors emerged from a cave on its slopes, carrying the placenta of humankind. The Kikuyu call the mountain Kiri Nyaga, meaning mountain of brightness. But locals have noticed that lately, instead of being bright and full of sparkle, the mountain is looking sad. The glaciers on its peak, known locally as the eternal snows, have retreated so far up the mountain that the surrounding forests are now at risk of drying out. Villagers who depend on the water from these forests for drinking and farming are already experiencing droughts, and even though the situation is dire, there is hope. One scientist working to understand the glaciers in the region has brought together local leaders and residents to help monitor the ice loss and come up with solutions. Since the project started, villagers have planted over 1 million trees to reforest the region, and they've worked with the government to ban plastic bags and promote clean cooking fuels. This community is taking action to reverse the damage done to their environment, and it's helping them fight back against the loss of their glaciers. It's hard to talk about glaciers without feeling a sense of foreboding. We talk about their melting, their disappearance, how they're part of a long-term decline in the health of our planet. But let me end this episode on a slightly less ominous note. The ancient Greek poet Homer compared glaciers to polished mirrors that reflect the cold light of winter. And as we watch these icy giants vanish, it's important to remember that they existed in the first place because of winter. They are the memory of Earth's winters. And that means as long as we have winters, we also have the potential to make more glaciers. We can't bring back the glaciers we've lost, but we can learn from the past to better understand the present and preserve the future. All of the information that we gain about glaciers helps us better understand our world and predict how it will change in the coming decades. It allows us to develop new technologies that help conserve resources and adapt to new environments. It even gives us insight into what life was like hundreds or thousands of years ago. The truth is that glaciers have shaped the world as we know it today, and studying them will help us navigate the changes that lie ahead. The best way to learn more about the world around us is to explore it for ourselves, and that's something that everyone can do. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode.